Good morning, all. So, a bit difficult topic, and it's a live topic. So, everybody is more worried about the environmental change, like the elective intubation, elective airway assessment in the OT complex, where everything is equipped and you have manpower, you have instruments, you have all the equipment required for intubation of patient. Managing the airway is one side, and the other side is when the patient is in ICU. So we just discuss about, but at the end also I am not clear whether to say whether it is a boon or ban. It is an open discussion at the ending. So coming to the our topic, most probably all these things might have already from yesterday and today next topics may they cover these things. Just I want to throw a little bit of like it's a passion, like what is the history of airway management and tracheostomies. So initially, way back into the period of the father of medicine, Hippocrates' writings, they say that in the Alexander the Great, he has done this first tracheostomy to save a patient, whatever it is called as cricotomy, cricothyroidotomy, whatever it is. Bone choked, and ultimately he has used his knife and put his in throat, and he saved that patient. This is way back, that is the history. Then and the Leonardo da Vinci also, he talked about arteria aspera, which was the other name for the trachea. Then on the slowly the evaluated thing of the history, a Danish anesthesiologist by John Asben. So he has done many tracheostomies to save the patient in epidemic, that is polio epidemic. So this is the like collection. The lectures on this is clearly which was there in the box. The trachea or asteria is a tube or a canal extending from the mouth down to the lungs. So it is trachea. So then the terminology is how it evolved, like bronchotomy, tracheotomy. So first known depiction of the tracheostomy way back in 3600 BC, when it was given in the Egyptian writings. Then I told that Alexander has done this. Then writings of this Artius and Galen. Then it came down to Asclepius. Then Antonia Musa Brazola, first person successfully done the tracheostomy. Then done that name changed to tracheostomy, bronchotomy, tracheotomy, then tracheostomy. Ultimately, it came into the limelight in the polio epidemic. Sorry. So coming to our airway intubations, so basic overall indications for intubation, like any patient who is not breathing definitely requires an airway and definitive airway like intubation. Then patient breathing, but his breathing is not enough to maintain his gas exchange. Then patient is breathing, but hypoxemia or hypercapnia is still persistent. Patient breathing with no problem with the gas exchange, but in order to maintain that proper gas exchange, maybe his work of breathing is very hard. And ultimately, breathing is not an issue. Problem is from the neuromuscular issue. Problem is from the brain issue. Then we need to protect the airway to protect the lung. So, to our topic, the basic introduction is patient in the environment of ICU who requires intubation, proper intubation, whatever the measures you take, still there is a chance of 2 to 4% of cardiac arrest. Then the evolved thing is rapid sequence intubation, minimizing the time to intubate the patient, taking him onto the spontaneous breathing to the advanced airway and intubating. So that came into the limelight, like called as rapid sequence intubation, where you maybe in the yesterday and today's classes they have a detailed description about these RSIs. Then we came to that if you give good pre-oxygenation, any patient who is given good pre-oxygenation prior to inducing, prior to attempt the intubation, so the dissolved oxygen will be more, and the oxygen that is combined to the hemoglobin is also saturated completely. Patient will be having good reserve, and it can be maintained for as long as maybe 6 to 8 minutes in a healthy lung. But in a condition where in an ICU patient, we don't get this much of reserve time because patient is already hypoxemic. Whatever the way you want to maintain good oxygenation is our motto, and we are not able to manage that. That is the indication we are intubating the patient. So this pre-oxygenation concept may not hold good in the environment of ICU. And we came to a point that to avoid intubation, whatever the may be the reason, like to prevent the VAP or whatever So sometimes we may use the supraglottic instruments. So those things definitely will not work in these patients. So supraglottic airway management is not as simple as that is happening in the OT. So these are the some literature we have gone through. This is published in Indian Journal of Anesthesia by Devati and his colleagues. Tracheal intubation in ICU is a life-saving or a life-threatening. So this is one topic they extensively discussed on this. It's a review article, and what are all the difficulties we come across in a patient who is getting intubated in a very, very bad physiological condition. So this is one paper in the 2011 in the published in Anesthesia Journal of Great Britain and Ireland, airway challenge in the critical care. So coming to our point, like difficult airway, commonly we come across this is the thing whether we can intubate the patient is only decided by the difficult airway, which is mostly an anatomical description of the patient. So airway interventions in critical ill patients are potentially more difficult. The reasons are the illness is continuing. He is not a healthy patient as that is happening in the OT. OT we have a respiratory wise patient is healthy. We are intubating electively to this patient, and we have everything that is required to do that process, manpower, equipment, everything. So second thing is we don't have enough time to get prepared for the worst situation, because we are doing intubations in mostly emergency situations. And patient is ongoing hypoxemia is there. On the top of that, we are giving so much of medications to facilitate the adequacy intubation. So we are stopping his breathing, which worsens the oxygenation. Second thing is increased risk of patient is having like respiratory distress, his sympathetic activity is on the high side. So once we give some medications to facilitate the intubation, the patient cardiovascular system will get collapsed. And more so, we don't know about his fasting status. There is always a risk of aspiration in such patients. Then something is like as we know that intubation, we know preparation, that's pre-medication, so much of all pieces are there. But here, we don't have a proper location and positioning of the patient to intubate because head end of the patient will be having some obstruction will be there. Patient position and height may not be adjustable to our Zivis sternum level. So all these things are difficulties here. So next extension to this anatomical problems, we have a physiological problems. So difficult airway now we come across like being an OT environment, it is only anatomical difficulty. We are not bothered about the physiological aspects of the patient. We take it granted that his physiology is stable. But in a situation where the patient is very sick who requires intubation in ICU, we have to look into the physiological difficult airway. So here the thing is recognition of deranged physiology in the patient. The patient is hypotensive, patient is tachypneic, patient in respiratory distress, patient in severe metabolic acidosis. So all these things we need to consider before attempting the patient to intubate. So whatever the airway assessment and airway the scorings and everything is only given towards the anatomical assessments. We never come across like there is no definitive guidelines and recommendations that are being given to overcome these physiological derangements. So similarly, in your in the difficult airway session, you might have come across all this, how the scoring is given, what are all the different aspects we need to look into to pre-assess before intubation itself. We assess that patient intubation is going to become difficult or it is an easy intubation. So there are certain scoring systems have come. Most probably yesterday in some this airway assessment you might have come across this. So here the situations can be of 3-4 varieties, like difficult mask or supraglottic airway ventilation. The facial contour is not adequate or is not congenial to have a mask ventilation. So it is difficult to give a ventilation when the patient is completely apneic. I am not able to give the proper airway, maintain the airway. Mask ventilation is not possible in such patients. So there is some difficulty either in the supraglottic airway placements. And sometimes my laryngoscopy may not be easy. So introduction of the laryngoscope into the mouth, and we have to pushing the tongue to the convenient side, then looking into the glottis. Maybe the difficult laryngoscopy is there. So after this also maybe highly placed glottis, and so we are not able to, we can see the partially we can see the posterior aspects of the vocal cords, but we are not able to intubate this patient. So these are all the 4 difficult situations we come across. So predictors of difficult intubation: old age, male gender, obesity, edentless patient, facial hair. So anyway, it's a list of things you have to, you will be knowing this. Then predictors of difficult supraglottic airway and ventilation. Here that male gender, obesity patients, poor dentition, similarly, neck radiation, not able to extend the cervical spine. So spine motions, and there is decreased mobility of the neck, and any pathology related to the upper airway. So predictors of difficult endotracheal intubation, laryngoscopy, as we know that this is the distances like thyromantle distance, this entrances are even three finger distance. So all these things are at stake. So this is one possibility we need to look into. So this is one more criteria, like Lemon criteria. They say that it is a good predictor of evaluation of the difficult intubation. So look for this and assessment, then evaluate all the 333. That's 3 like submental, like interincisor distance, 3 submental fingers placement in the from the chin to the supraglottis, thyroid cartilage. Then 2 centimeters from the thyroid cartilage to the base of the mandible. Then Mallampati scoring, obstructive or obesity patients, then neck mobility restricted patients. So these are all we need to look into. These are all scorings. This is the 333 rule. Then there is another mnemonic by name like Roman, where there is a previous exposure of radiation to the neck, where there is a restricted movement of the neck is expected. And if any patient is obese, where there is a short neck and a big chin and everything is difficult, then we have to identify that there is a mask sealing is difficult in such patients where the facial contour is not proper. Then any patient whose age is more than 55 years, then edentless patient. Edentless patient. So assessment for difficult cricothyrotomy, where this is the SMART assessment. Though recent surgery happened in the neck area, then any mass that is in the obstructing this area of that cricothyrotomy, anatomical like Peary Robinson syndromes, so much of neck fusion syndromes. Then previous history of radiation, any tumor. Supraglottic airway, it is RODS. So restricted lung complaints or mouth opening, obstruction diseases, disrupted or distorted airway, and short thyromantle distance. Coming to the physiological difficulty of the airway, intubation procedure, not only we look into the anatomical problems, airway management, we also look into the hemodynamics, look into the gas exchange, what is the neurological condition of the patient. So these are all the situations we need to focus on. Patient factors, we know that anatomical factors and physiological factors, physiological, and it is also extension to the altered physiology is pathology. So we need to look into the equipment. Are we really equipped with whatever the difficulty that comes into? I have a Bogie, I have a 2 laryngoscope, I have a video laryngoscope. Can I go with a what is that called as any like mini bronchoscopy or regular bronchoscopy for intubation? So we need to escalate our management strategies depending upon the requirements there. So are we really equipped with that? Then coming to the environment, OT environment is completely different and ICU environment is a compromised way. And the staffing pattern, the time, in OT, we have a time, we can postpone the case. We need not, okay, so or else we have manpower. We can have such time to bite some time and so that we can do the next advanced procedure. But here, everything is time bound. If you don't intubate, patient is going to die. If you intubate and we are planned to intubate and we are not able to intubate, we are killing the patient. So that is the difference here. Then comes the medications. We can't give liberal medications in these patients. In OT, we can go with the pre-medication, induction phase, then gaseous anesthetics, then muscle relaxants. So much we can give in OT because the patient physiology is stable. But here, whatever the medicine you are going to give, ultimately either they come in the category of venodilators, they are come into the category of any depressants. So ultimately, and after giving this, you cannot check back. If I have given a relaxant and I am not able to intubate this patient because of the difficult airway, so that is the end of the life. So this is the differences between the OT to ICU. Then manpower, OT, the routine, our staff and everybody is tuned to intubate, tuned to help us. They know what they want. If I say Bogie, immediately they'll get the Bogie. If I say I want a laryngoscope, the arrangements and the tailored techniques are there in the OT, whereas in the ICU, we keep on changing the staff pattern. The sister who is more well versed with intubation with me may not be there in the night duty when I am there. So manpower, then the skills. Skills was, we are skilled enough, but the situation is not supportive. A pilot, a good pilot cannot drive a ship, is it not? And a good pilot, if wife is like want to go to some hospital at the midnight 12 o'clock, if he's not having a car, his whatever the skills he's having, it's not useful. So similarly, late nights and the different category of consultants, like senior consultant, maybe their junior consultant, registrar. So who is doing this is also very, very important. So the other side is what type of disease the patient is having. Is he having a type 1 respiratory failure, type 2 respiratory failure? Is he having a septic shock? Is he on multiple vasopressors? He is having acidosis or acidemia. The patient is having came to ER with a trauma, distorted air, facial contour. So what to do? So then the patient maybe sometimes comes with a severe angioedema, anaphylactic shock. If we don't intubate that patient, his glottis is getting closed and because of edema. So at that ER, we don't know anything what is there. You are just called there to ER to intubate the patient. If you don't intubate, you will get fooled. And if you try to intubate and if at that point, if something happens wrong, again they will blame you. Is it not? So we are going to a new environment. They expect you to do everything, which is very difficult for us to do. So the situationally, place-wise, all these things matters a lot. So it's not as easy as that is happening in OT when we are going to intubate a patient in a situations like an emergency room, situations like in a, ICU in the late night. So definitely it is like difficult. So coming to the first point, pre-oxygenation. If in a healthy patient, pre-oxygenation is a reasonably very good thing. If you pre-oxygenate the patient for 4 minutes with 100% oxygen, so definitely it gives a good reserve. But my patient is already imagine that my patient is an ARDS or something like, he is on 100% FiO2 on NIV. Now I am going to intubate that patient. If I just remove the facial mask of the NIV, what happens? Patient desaturates. So even on NIV also is not maintaining good saturation. What best I can do beyond this? NIV is just a step before to the intubation. Only thing is there is no tube here. Here there is a tube, that's all. So even at that point where patient is in like borderline saturation, like around 88 to 99, then I decided to intubate the patient and I just removed the mask and I had given some medications and patient collapsed. Okay. Then compared to the pre-oxygenation statin does not work in the patient who is respiratory pathology is there. So already patient is an NIV or HFNC, then what is the point of pre-oxygenation? Because we know that pre-oxygenation saves the patient, but here it doesn't work. Normally pre-oxygenation beyond 4 minutes, there is no advantage. Give 4 minutes, 100% oxygen with high flows. There is increased quantity of dissolved oxygen in the plasma, increased saturation 100% to the hemoglobin. So ultimately that gives a good reserve in a patient who is already doing well. The patient is sick, this does not have any positive impact. So for the little bit deeper into the pre-oxygenation, so the patient could have he need to have a good FRC. So my patient is in sitting position, breathing with an NIV and saturation 100%. His saturations are maintaining around 90, 92. In the process of intubation, I made the patient flat. What happens to the FRC? FRC still worsens because diaphragm is pushed up. So is it really helpful? The position itself, if you can intubate this patient in a supine position, it is good. But usually, practically, it is difficult. We can't intubate any patient in like sitting position. You can make the patient flat, then only intubate. If you make the patient flat, his diaphragm will come up and his FRC will go down and further oxygenation will drop. So availability, then the thing is there is another concept called denitrogenation. If you give good flow of oxygen, ultimately the nitrogen is being washed out. So but here it is nothing. So availability of the reservoir to resaturate the hemoglobin, shunt fractions. So shunt fraction is one more thing because in ARDS, there is a problem with the ventilation perfusion mismatch. So whatever the oxygen you are going to give up to the lung may not go into the blood because there is a diffusion hypoxemia. So definitely these things will not hold good. You presume that pre-oxygenation may help, but it does not help in these patients. In a healthy patient, if you give pre-oxygenation, baseline saturation from 79 to 80 will go up to 400. If the patient is sick and the respiratory issues are there, even though you give pre-oxygenation, the saturations are not going beyond 87. And the corresponding PO2 is around 50s. Patient with airspace diseases, traditional pre-oxygenation will work because there is a good FRC and shunt is not actually acting there. But in a patient who is having a severe ARDS, severe airway diseases, so these things will play. His FRC has come down and there is a shunt fraction is working there, so ultimately there is hypoxemia. Some patients are so severely hypoxemic that these things may not work. So this is the hypoxemia with giving a good pre-oxygenation. If you give basically a good lung, a pre-oxygenation is properly taken care, then we can accept an apnea up to 8 to 10 minutes. But in a patient who is already hypoxemic, even on high supports of NIV or HFNC, who don't have a reserve time, even minutes and seconds matter there. Denitrosation is one thing, like this one slide on that. Denitrosation of the FRC is impaired by difficulty in oxygen source without, like with ambient room air. If you give high flows, but the thing is, no, whatever you are giving from the wall mount, that is 6 liters, 10 liters, 15 liters of oxygen is fixed. But the patient to patient differs. One patient breathing at 15 respiratory rate and a tidal volume of 500, when compared to another patient who is breathing at 40 rate and his tidal volume is 1 liter, who is in respiratory distress, his minute ventilation is very high. So ultimately, whatever the oxygen that is given from the mask or what is getting diluted. When the minute ventilation is more, the flow what we are giving is getting diluted. When the minute ventilation is low, maybe we can manipulate certain oxygen concentration in the flows. So identify the patient who is tachypneic, who is having high minute ventilation to combat the metabolic acidosis. Sometimes patient is in severe decay, is having Kussmaul's breathing, is breathing at high rate. So those patients, if you stop his breathing, things will worsen. Right? Coming to the procedures, always stratify your patients. Stratification is dependent on PO2 to FiO2 ratio. So you can identify which patient is going to crash and what to be done. If the patient PO2 to FiO2 ratio is more than 200, you can go with an RSBI, sorry, rapid sequence intubation technique. PO2 100 to 200, escalate to first to stabilize the patient if possible onto NIV or HFNC, buy some oxygenation good time, then try to intubate. If the patient is in very bad stage, try to maintain his own physiology and awake intubation is the choice. This is one flush flow rate oxygen. So you have to give high oxygen like 70 to 80 liters of oxygen through a nasal cannula. Maybe it maintains a continuous flow of oxygen into the respiratory tract even though the patient is in apnea after giving a relaxant. This is the technique where you need to look into. When you give a relaxant, patient is apneic and you are buying some few seconds to get the laryngoscope putting inside. So it may take some 10-15 seconds, 30 seconds depending upon the skill and the environment there. So during that time, if you force oxygen into his airway, still there is a possibility we can create a diffusion into the blood and oxygenation may be maintained well. So this is one thing. High risk for desaturation, always go with HFO and NIV. Patient severely hypoxemic where rapid sequence intubation is planned. Before to that, NIV is to be done. And an apneic oxygenation with fast flush test, flush oxygen you need to look. So these are the things, same repetition. There is same high transnasal humidified rapid insufflation ventilatory exchange of 70 liters per minute. Oxygen flow need to be given when the patient is in the phase of apnea. Coming to the next part, hemodynamics. In OT, patient hemodynamics are stable. We don't have any problem with his BP, we don't have any problem with his internal environment, no acidosis, nothing. But my patients, mostly we come across hypoxemic patients, we come across CO2 narcosis, intubation, we come across patient who is having high lactates, hypoperfusion state in a septic shock. So these are the scenarios we normally intubate in ICU. So coming to this, pre-intubation hemodynamic compromise, peri-intubation is very, very common. So that has a negative impact on the overall outcome of the patient at the end of how the patient outcomes are maintained. So there is a long inpatient stay, length of stay is more, then increased need for renal replacements, decreased likelihood of survival. Cardiovascular collapse is, as I described, 2 to 4% of the patients are landing into cardiac arrest. Then peri-intubation hypotension, if the rates like reported in 30 to 46% of the patients there is hypotension, patient seems to be stable hemodynamically because his sympathetic drive is on the higher side. He himself is, his body is maintaining reasonable hemodynamics. Once you give this saturation like sedation agents and relaxant agents, venodilatation happens and BP drops down. By the time you intubate the patient and intubation is successful, tied the everything like secured the airway, then next be, because at that time patient is not, may not be having an invasive blood pressure monitoring. So non-invasive blood pressure monitoring every 3 minutes we keep. That is the minimum I think I can keep. So again in the next blood pressure reading after intubation, look back and it will be like 50 by 30. Pre-operatively it is okay, 100 by 60. Sorry, pre-intubation. So this is indirectly you need to look into how the hemodynamics. So look into the shock index. If shock index is more than 0.8, you have to anticipate that peri-intubation or post-intubation there will be a drop in the blood pressure. So if you have a time, fluid resuscitation, one thing what you can do. So give enough fluids as per the newer guidelines, like look into the IVC, look into the anterior B lines, look into the LV contractility. Patient is a responder or a non-responder. You can give some fluid boluses like 200 to 300 ml and artificially maintain a good PP at the time of pre or peri-intubation techniques. So then come, better to get ready with a vasopressor. Noradrenaline is the choice of vasopressor in a patient expected to have a hypotension. So then you need to look into the RV guided. If the RV dysfunction versus RV failure, if the patient is having an RV dysfunction, so positive pressure ventilation will obviously will have a low preload. So if you can anticipate a low preload after the intubation, changing from the spontaneous breathing, which is a negative pressure ventilation, to a positive pressure ventilation, there will be a drop in the preload. So fill the compartments early before intubation. So all these things is that we need to identify the anticipate a hypotension after the intubation. So preload the patient, assess the patient, and get ready with vasopressors and inotropes. And the same thing now I told you, any patient who was in a sitting position will have a good FRC. When you make the patient flat, there will be decrease in the FRC because of the diaphragm goes up. So this we need to consider, and there will be definitely desaturation after intubation in the process of intubation. So predictors of post-intubation cardiovascular collapse: old age patients, patient who are hypotensive, patient is in shock prior to intubation, intubation for respiratory failure, and patient who is having high Apache scoring. Next, third thing is patient who is having a metabolic acidosis, we are planning to intubate. So metabolic acidosis, the compensatory mechanism happens through the lung. Lung is now in breathing like tachypnea will be there. So high minute ventilation will be there to maintain a normal pH, because lung is the compensation activity to the metabolic acidosis. So when you relax the patient and not allowing the patient to breathe on his own, and we are taking some time to intubate, maybe time means it is only seconds to minutes. So intubate and then put the patient on ventilation. His background metabolic acidosis is drastically worsens because we are not allowing the lung to compensate for that. So pre-intubation minute ventilation, one thing we need to understand. If the patient breathing the same thing, patient breathing at 40 breaths per minute, and what is that? Tidal volume is 1 liter every breath. So it is almost like coming to 40 liters or some more. So I just intubate the patient, connect the patient to protein like ARDS 20 rate, and not crossing 6 to 8 ml per kg body weight, that is 400 ml of average adult. So my minute ventilation is half of the pre-intubation minute ventilation. So where from the compensation happens to the metabolic acidosis. So similar situation, you have intubated, connect to the ventilation, next BP reading crash. So hypoventilation, flow starvation, patient, the ventilatory settings, all these things are important. Coming to the fourth part is medications. Propofol is a venodilator. Then comes whatever the inducing agents used like midazolam or benzodiazepines or venodilators. Then how do we go with it? So available things is etomidate and ketamine. Etomidate, some people argue that it may cause adrenal suppressions, but there is no clear-cut proof for that. Still people are using etomidate. Then ketamine, but ketamine increases oxygen consumption to the heart. These things, when the patient is already in hemodynamically unstable condition, so heart is at stake. Now we are inducing more load on the heart. So these are all the plus and minuses of these medicines. So you have to tailor the technique, give minimal doses, see the response. There is nothing like a single blanket dose like anesthesia. Like ketamine is 2 milligrams per kg body weight. Propofol is something like 5 milligrams, 2 milligrams. So nothing like that. You have to assess the patient, give small doses, see the patient how much is getting under our control, then fix it. So this is one study. They studied propofol, ketamine and etomidate. So clearly told that still etomidate is the drug of choice. This is one list of drug medications. So we need to have an intubation care bundle, like pre-intubation, during intubation and post-intubation. So depending upon the anatomical and physiological derangements, we have to have a proper plan of care, then follow these basic steps, then you may land up into successful intubation in a sick patient. This is a bundle approach. This is expert guidelines. In this it is being given, the bundle approach. So finally there is an algorithm for a patient who is getting intubated in ICU. Same thing, a repetition of all these scorings. So now the question is, it is a boon or ban intubating a patient in a ICU situations. So first thing I look into, is the oxygenation is adequate or not? Is the hemodynamics stable? Patient is metabolic or respiratory acidosis is already in the patient. Somebody is forcing me to intubate without getting myself prepared for intubation? Possible, no? Seniors will come, boss, intubate immediately. I am not prepared for that. So I may land up into problems. Is acute sequence intubation is a reasonable approach in this particular patient? If the RSA is not reasonable, am I able to see the glottis and perform a awake intubation? Is there still sufficient time to improve the oxygenation prior to intubation, to buy some time? So this is my final call on whether to call it as a boon or ban. So it is open to you all, whichever you take. But I love to be an ICU intensivist and managing the critical care situations. Always think that it is a boon. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That was a very informative session. The next speaker would be Manjunath, sir. Any questions in these sessions can be asked to sir?
Any questions, feel free to ask. No questions?
Any questions regarding intubation, emergencies, scores?
Right. Thank you.
Sir has almost discussed the physiology behind what, when and how very detailedly. Thank you, sir, for that. The next speaker would be Manjunath, sir. The topic is rescue airway devices selecting in crisis. Sir has been practicing transplant anesthesia with Apollo Hospital since 2010. He has been instrumental in starting transplant anesthesia and transplant ICU services across 9 centers in India. He did his transplant anesthesia and preoperative care fellowship from Freeman Hospital, Newcastle, UK. He is actively involved in preoperative care of transplant patients, including acute liver failure patients. So, sir's topic is rescue airway devices, what to select in crisis. Over to you, sir.